Welcome. We wanted to create this video to provide some applicable information regarding the new world language standards that are scheduled for implementation July 1st, 2026. This video makes reference to several resources. We have provided the links for those resources on this webpage for you. I'm Michelle McCarthy, the Science Instructional Coordinator with the Office of Public Instruction. You may be wondering what the science coordinator has to do with the world language standards. Well, I'm not an expert on the instruction of these standards, but I do know where to locate resources that will be beneficial to the implementation of these new standards. In 2023, I had the pleasure of attending the 3-day workshop wherein we had expert educators from across the state, the task force writing team, who worked together to write the standards that you will be implementing as of July 1st, 2026. Very soon you'll be hearing from Galen Brokaw and Matthew Bell, other attendees of the writing workshop. After Dr. Brokaw shares implementation advice with us, we will hear from Matthew Bell, the Language and Culture Specialist with the Office of Public Instruction, who will present us with resources and advice on multilingual and cultural resources and strategies when implementing the world language standards. Following our two interviewees, I'll walk you through the standards timeline, discuss how a world language program fits into the administrative rules, and where the documents regarding these standards are located. Then we'll break down the standards a bit before I display the performance descriptors affiliated with these standards. Lastly, I'll leave you with some resources that will be helpful in implementation. All resources will be linked on this website. In this presentation, the slides that are marked with a red ribbon are for both administrators and teachers. The red ribbon slides constitute the first half of the presentation. To get started, it is my pleasure to introduce Galen Brokaw, an MSU professor who is head of the Modern Languages and Literature Department. Galen was also a member of the World Language Standards Development Team that met several times virtually and in person for 3 days in Helena with other expert educators from across the state of Montana to develop standards and performance descriptors that reflect the best opportunities for Montana students. The Writing Task Force reviewed research regarding best practices in language acquisition, reviewed the standards of other states, and discussed multilingual student guidance with specific references to Montana's Native Americans. Galen was instrumental in contributing his years of experience in rewriting the standards and ensuring the performance descriptors were included in the administrative rules of Montana. He is with us today to share implementation advice for us. So Galen, could you please share a little bit about yourself, your educational experiences, and your role in rewriting the world language standards?
So I'm a lifelong language learner. I started studying German in junior high. I studied German throughout junior high and high school, and I was participated in an exchange program in Germany when I was in high school. And then in college, I started studying French, and then I also lived in Latin America for a few years, where I worked down there. I kept taking breaks from college to do different things, and so I learned Spanish and learned Spanish on the street, so to speak. So I've learned different languages in different ways. So I have sort of an immersion experience learning Spanish, for example, and then came back to college, continued studying French and Spanish and German, and then I took another break. I joined the military, and I was a linguist in the military. I studied Korean at the Defense Language Institute, and I worked as a Korean translator in the military for 4 years. And then I got out. I finished college, went to graduate school, studied Portuguese and Nahuatl, which is the indigenous language of Mexico, the language the Aztecs spoke. And I've dabbled in a few others, just like I wouldn't be able to say I speak these. But it's interesting that people always ask you, like, oh, how many languages do you speak? But speak is just such a vague term, right? I mean, I'm sort of fluent in English and Spanish, and then I have varying levels of proficiency in those other languages. German, I used to be really good, but it's been a long time. So those are my educational experiences, and in terms of language, right? And I have a PhD in Spanish. So I teach Spanish here at Montana State University, and my role was the same as everybody else who was on that committee. It was a joint effort, and I think you described it very well in terms of, we got together and we looked at the old ones. We looked at examples of other states have done, and so I'll speak more to some of that in response to some of the other questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what advice would you give to a first year language teacher?
I'd say several things. One is be familiar with the ACTFL guidelines and their curricular implications, and also be familiar with your school's learning outcome goals. So one of the things that we did not do, one of the things that the World Language Standards do not do, is specify specific learning outcomes for, say, a first year course. And the reason why we didn't do that is because there are, different schools do things differently, and there's also different school district will have a first year Spanish class, say, at the middle school, or first, Spanish 1 or whatever at the middle school, and others will only do it at high school. And so the age of the student actually has implications for what your goal may be at a particular level. Because keep in mind that students are also on the proficiency scale in their native language, and so in English. And so that has implications for what you can do. You can't expect a student who's, say, at intermediate level in English to be able to achieve an advanced level in another language, right? So that's important to know. But so you got to know what those are. And when I say when I refer to curricular implications of the ACTFL guidelines, you'll notice that the performance descriptors are formulated in terms of actual proficiency levels. And so it's necessary, it's important to know what those mean. And of course, the performance descriptors themselves explain what they mean, but the more familiar you are with the guidelines in general and what their implications are, the better, because it's going to inform what you do. And I want to make sure that it's clear here, and I think it's also important that everyone be clear the difference between the proficiency approach and the methodology that they use, right? The World Language Standards do not speak to methodology. They speak to, they're, like I said, they're designed, they're informed by the actual proficiency guidelines. And the implication of the guidelines is that a language learner advances their proficiency in a particular way. They're able to do the things that the novice level describes before they're able to do the things that the intermediate level describes. They're able to do the things at the intermediate level before they can do advanced level things. Now there are some exceptions there, but in general, that's the way it works. That you're not going to be able to narrate and describe in the past before you can narrate and describe in the present. Again, could you methodologically sort of focus on the past and get them to do that maybe before they can do present? Perhaps, right? But just naturally, that's not the way it works. And cognitively, you're going to be much better off following that progression than you will be if you don't, because again, it lays a groundwork. Teaching them more basic things on this scale, those things lay the groundwork for the more advanced. All right, but that's an approach. It has implications for curricular design. It doesn't tell you how to achieve those goals, right? And so there's all kinds of different methodologies, and you should be clear. I think, again, and this is something that hopefully you will have learned in the teaching methods class and through the experience you have student teaching, but you should be very clear on what your methodology is and how to implement it. And you should make sure that you're aligning your curriculum with the learning outcomes of your school and your level. Now, another issue is textbooks, right? And you obviously, if your school uses a textbook, then you need to figure out how to use it appropriately, right? And I say that because on the one hand, it may be obvious because you say, well, the textbook lays everything out for you. And that's the advantage, huge advantage of using a textbook, is it presents everything for you, activities, etc. And again, I teach at the university level, so I'm not that familiar with high school textbooks. But if they're anything like college textbooks, there may not be any textbook that is designed from this proficiency perspective. In other words, that organizes the material in such a way that helps students progress through that proficiency scale. Most textbooks are designed around what I call a grammar coverage model, where they try to cover all major grammatical concepts, and they spend more time on the more advanced ones, less time on the more basic ones, even though everyone knows that having gone through that, say, section, students don't master it, right? A proficiency-based approach would imply that you're going to spend more time before trying to get them to learn how to narrate and describe in the past. You're going to try to get them to master how to narrate and describe in the present. All right, so I'm just using that example because it's one that's maybe the easiest to sort of refer to and explain. I know in Montana what I've heard from my colleagues in the public schools is a lot of them are are ditching the textbook, but that requires a lot of time, and you got to create your own materials and things like this. So there's a middle ground there too, and that's what oftentimes we do at the university is we sort of use a textbook as a guide, but then we develop additional materials around the chapters that are there and spend a lot more time on them than they're designed. They're designed to be than the time that's designed for them. The textbook is sort of foresees for you. All of those issues you need to think through, and you need to think through in the context of the curriculum of the school and what that culture of that school is.
Thank you. Galen just gave us some great information and a lot of things to think about, such as in your district, what does proficiency look like? What are the differences of proficiency in different grade levels? And what guides the student towards proficiency? Do they know about it? Just some food for thought. Matt Bell is our next speaker. He also attended all of the World Language Standards Writing Team's meetings and contributed his expertise. He was an expert in the inclusion of Montana Native American language and culture. And Matt, can you tell us a little bit about your role in the World Language Standards revision?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Bell. I'm the Language and Culture Specialist here at OPI with the Tribal Student Achievement and Relations Unit. My job was to kind of advocate for the upcoming revisions that happened and then look to our community across Montana for an educator, a few educators who might be interested in participating in the think tank and revision process for the contents, and ask that they be a part of the process and bring them in with their unique understanding of Indigenous languages and understanding of epistemologies.
Could you please share with us advice you would give a first-year language teacher for embedding Indian Ed within their lessons?
Absolutely. For first-year teachers, I would encourage them to look for our website. We have a number of lesson plans that are already laid out with resources listed. We also have a number of pre-recorded webinars and discussions, talks given by knowledge keepers from various tribes across Montana. So I'd look for those and see what is comfortable, what is accessible, and then also continue to think about what you were interested in and ask questions of us and our team and reach out, and we're happy to come help with the implementation or discussion of any of those resources.
Well, thank you, Matt.
Some other additional resources I might look for multicultural, multilingual teaching might be from our partners at WestEd, the folks over at Coloring Colorado, and the folks at WIDA who help administrate some of the testing and stuff like that. In addition, there are apps and other language opportunities through the tribes to help teach their language and their cultural understandings. And I think it would be a great opportunity to trans-language and cross-reference some world languages with Indigenous languages that are prevalent in Montana for the sake of further deepening those understandings and opportunities that language affords language learners. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I hope you found the information our speakers shared with us very helpful in implementing Indian education for all and the World Language Standards. Briefly mentioned earlier in our interviews, in 2023, the Standards Development Team met to review research and modify the standards. These revisions were then presented to the Superintendent of Schools. The Superintendent, in turn, presented them to the Negotiated Rulemaking Committee, which reviewed them before presenting them back to the Superintendent of Schools. Then the Superintendent recommended the final revisions to the Board of Public Education in 2024. After considering public comment, the Board of Public Education adopted these standards in early 2025 and set the implementation date for these standards as July 1st, 2026. Montana World Language courses must follow the program standards that are in the Administrative Rules of Montana 10.55.2101. They state that in general, a basic program in world languages shall 1. Meet the following conditions. consistent and continual experiences with the target language and culture, access to native speakers or experts, authentic cultural contact, and culturally authentic materials. Examples could be print, video, audio, literature, music, art, and access to technology that provides contact with the target language. They should also include the following practices. Promote confidence in practicing the language by encouraging risk-taking and minimizing verbal correction. Maximize use of target language in an authentic manner through student-teacher and student-student interaction. Gain understanding of the cultural perspective of the target culture. So where can you find the standards? There are several locations available for you to locate them. The first one is in the Administrative Rules of Montana, which shares what public schools in Montana must teach students what to do and to know upon completion of each grade level. The content standards are also listed on the OPI website. The steps to reach the World Language website are located in the following crumb trail: opi.mt.gov, then to educators, then to teaching and learning, then to K-12 content standards, then to world languages. Another option to find all of the Montana content standards is through Satchel. We are in the process of getting all the updated standards into this resource. So if you do not see the standards you are looking for, please don't hesitate to reach out. The link to Satchel is also found on the World Language Standards page. Standards are also listed in the Montana K-12 World Languages Content Standards Guidance document. This pamphlet contains comprehensive guidance that includes, but is not limited to, the content standards, performance descriptors, guidance for selecting curricular material, and a community of world language educators, such as the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACTFL, the Montana Association of Language Teachers, MALT, and the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese, just to name a few. MALT members will be presenting at the 2025 MFPE Educators Conference in Missoula, October 16th and 17th. Also located in the Administrative Rules of Montana are the World Language Performance Descriptors. There are 3 levels of descriptors: novice, intermediate, and advanced. Within each level, subheadings pinpoint specific modes, and then they are broken down further to describe what a learner can do at that level. The remainder of this presentation is mostly dedicated to information for teachers of world languages. The state has coded the content standards to reflect that they are from Montana, that they are the content area of world languages, the number of the standard that they are, and finally, which substandard they are. The performance descriptors follow a similar coding with the state, content, performance descriptor, level, standard, and substandard. This is referred to as human coding, as when they are uploaded into EdTech's case network, it is in machine coding so that they are able to be downloaded into schools' student information systems. The content standards themselves fall into 5 categories. Those categories are communication, cultures, connections, comparisons, and communities, the 5 C's. Within these categories are the standards and then the substandards, each level becoming more explicit. So under the category of communication, there is one standard, but there are several substandards. So the standard is communicate effectively in more than one language in order to function in a variety of situations and for multiple purposes. Then A is interpersonal communication. The learner interacts and negotiates meaning in spoken, signed, or written conversations to share. They're sharing information, reactions, feelings, opinions. B is when learners hear, read, or view a variety of topics in the target language, they can understand a variety of topics, interpret a variety of topics, analyze a variety of topics. And then C is presentational communication. Learners present information, concepts, and ideas pertaining to a variety of topics using appropriate media and adapting to various audiences of listeners, readers, or viewers in order to inform, explain, persuade, and narrate. All of those standards and substandards really do cover all ways to communicate. There may be some things missing, but remember, the state standards are always the bare minimum. Always feel free to do more. The next set of standards are under cultures and connections. There is examples of what these could look like a little later in this video with a link to examples of formative and summative assessments regarding these, so it'll give you a picture of what it could look like in the classroom. Under comparisons, we have World Language 4, which asks the students to develop insight into the nature of language and culture, which asks students to develop insight into the nature of the language they're studying and the culture to interact with cultural competence, with a particular emphasis on Montana Indigenous cultures. They're expected to do language comparisons and cultural comparisons, where they investigate, explain, and reflect on the concepts through comparisons between their own way of life and the Montana Indigenous culture and language, including history, diversity, and sovereignty. The last category is communities. Within that, there's one standard and one substandard that basically has students creating a community or being able to act within a community, either local, global, within their school, where they learn language both within and beyond the classroom, and interact and collaborate with local, state, and global communities, including Montana Indigenous nations. Educators could work with ePALS for a global reach and work with their local Indigenous population also. Now that we've gone through the standards, here is an example of a lesson plan template that we adapted from the Colorado Department of Ed. You do not have to use it, obviously, but you might find it helpful. As mentioned earlier, here's an example of a formative assessment, taking into account that the performance descriptors and the standards themselves. The standards here that are measured are 2A, 2B, 3A, and the performance descriptor is under novice. This formative assessment is a My Town cultural mini tour that checks for understandings of basic cultural practices and products within a familiar context. We had 3 world language teacher specialists review this just to make sure that this would be appropriate. For you, it's an example of how these standards would look in implementation and also in a formative assessment. For the provided summative assessment example, the targeted standards are 2A, 2B, 3A, and 3B under the performance descriptor novice, which covers all of them with an emphasis on presentational. In this assessment, students create and present a postcard that reflects how they apply their knowledge of cultural practices and products in a cohesive and organized way within a structured and predictable format. Exceptions to these tasks and assessments apply when the language is American Sign Language, or ASL. An expert on ASL from the Standards Writing Task Forces, Brandy, states her thoughts regarding the My Town mini tour. 1. The deaf community isn't grounded in any one place or country. The deaf community is the perfect example of intersectionality. Disability doesn't discriminate. Anyone from any country or nationality can be deaf. Number 2. The deaf community values state schools for the deaf as home, because those locations are the center of the community, where everyone speaks the same language and lives the same experiences. Deaf students attending mainstream schools designed for hearing students is not a value. Deaf culture practices. 1. When deaf individuals meet each other for the first time, the first question they ask is, "What school did you attend?" Because the highest value in the community is attending a school for the deaf. Number 2, when getting each other's attention at a deaf-centered event, someone will flash the lights on and off. Other attention-getting practices include tapping on the shoulder, waving their hands, stomping on the floor, hitting the table, and sometimes throwing things. Number 3, rather than spelling each other's names over and over, deaf individuals assign each other name signs. A name sign is a way to identify someone based on a personality or characteristic. When introducing myself, I sign, quote, "My name is B-R-A-N-D-Y." Then I show my name sign. From that point onward, I'm referred to by my name sign. Number 4, maintaining eye contact during a conversation indicates respect and demonstrates attention to the interaction. An activity often performed in an ASL 1 course is meet on the street. 2 students pretend they are walking down the street. One of them sees a friend approaching. They stop and perform an introduction. Person 1, "Hi, good to see you." "Good to see you too. How are you?" Person 1, "Fine. Let me introduce you to my friend. This is S-U-E." Then shows the name sign. "This is M-A-R-Y," and shows the name sign. The 2 of us grew up together at the Iowa School for the Deaf. This activity demonstrates students' understanding of how to perform an introduction in deaf culture and the importance of eye contact. Thanks to Brandy, we have this resource to use if the class that you're teaching is ASL. Again, here is a list of some available programs. Just be conscientious that Montana students need to be guided by a Montana certified teacher. Some of these organizations are for teachers and some are for learning languages in class. MALT, ACTFL Learning Central, Ed2Go, Montana Digital Academy, Duolingo, OPI Learning Opportunities Portal. These links will be available on this page. Thank you for listening. If there are any resources that you would like to see that you haven't seen in this presentation, please feel free to contact me.